You're listening to the Values and Leadership Podcast, where business leaders share their stories of purposeful impact and success.
Hello, and welcome to the Values and Leadership Podcast, the podcast for innovative leaders who want to apply new ways of doing things in work to leave a remarkable legacy and have a purposeful impact on their stakeholders. I am your host, Ahmed Arif. I invite corporate owners, corporate leaders, and advisors who practice participative leadership and love to share their positive life and business experiences, their sense of direction, sense of meaning, and how they challenge their thinking in growing their business and people around them to their next best stage. Today, we are having a special guest. We have Minter Dial. He is following a bountiful 16 years international career at L'Oréal, including being head of Redken Worldwide and on the executive committee worldwide of the L'Oréal Professional Products Division. Minter returned to his entrepreneurial roots to become a thought leader, author, consultant, and professional speaker. Now he is based in London. He focuses on leadership and transformation. Minter is passionate about helping leaders and organizations adapt to the continually shifting digital marketplace. Minter, he has authored 3 books, and the 4th is coming up in early 2021, which is You Lead. And I'm grateful to have Minter today in our podcast. How are you, Minter? Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I'm very happy to be with you. And I feel like when you describe what you're doing on values and leadership, that this is a great place to have a conversation.
Great. Thank you. I'm happy that you are excited as well, like me, for this interview. As we discussed, every leader in his career and path in life, he has something which is dear to him, something that motivates him into life. And I want to know more about Minter, especially from INSEAD, because in INSEAD you had your MBA. And I think this was influential because this was just prior to joining L'Oréal and having your fruitful 16-year experience there. Can you give us your insights, what you gained? How did your study shape your career further after that?
So I went to INSEAD in 1992. I had been essentially brought up in Europe. And then I went to the United States for university. And I started working in the United States. I did a whole raft of crazy, fun, interesting things, including, let's say, working on Wall Street. But I also was a tennis pro, and I started up 2 entrepreneurial activities, including having a travel agency for musicians. And there are 2 reasons really why I applied to INSEAD, or at least to business school in Europe. And the first was I needed to straighten myself up. I basically had already, by the age of 27, done 7 different activities, 4 years of which were spent in Wall Street. But I started up a luxury leather goods company. I was, all over the place. And I needed to straighten up. The second thing was important to me was to move back to Europe. I'd been brought up in Europe. I did America in my mind, and I felt like I needed to come back to Europe. And the best conduit for that seemed to be getting to business school in Europe, and the shorter the better, because I already had quite a lot of experience. I wasn't interested in learning from scratch how to manage. And that's why I chose INSEAD. It chose me, and I had a great experience at INSEAD.
One of the activities or the societies that you were motivated to join was the U.S. Culture Society, I think. U.S. Culture Day, INSEAD.
Oh, yeah. Well, I did a lot of things at INSEAD. I was very active. I was involved in the culture days for the Swedes, the Norwegians, the Italians. I mean, and that's the glory of INSEAD. We had about 200 students that represented maybe 80 different nationalities. Obviously, some of us had double nationalities, but the wealth and the reach of internationalists. My group, when you start, you have an initial group of 7 people. We were 7 different industries, 7 different nationalities, lots of different languages. And it's sort of a setup to have fights and arguments and struggle, which really is what relationships need to have, which is to know how to deal with the bad times as well as the good times. Yeah, so I was very active socially. I'm still running the reunions. God knows, 30 years later, every 5 years we have a reunion, and I'm actively involved in all that.
Great, great. Now you moved into L'Oreal. What's so sticky in your mind from your L'Oreal experience? What do you think the best achievement you have made there?
All right. So just before, one thing is interesting to say, I think, is that when I was at INSEAD, I was really converting myself. And to be full in that conversion, I was very dedicated to this thing called marketing. I really had no idea what it was, truthfully, before. And frankly, through INSEAD, you don't get the whole picture because you learn how to hire and fire 1,000 people and create a marketing department. But usually when you start in marketing, it ain't that. It's more, how do you use the photocopy machine? How do you go out in the street? How do you do spreadsheets and more entrance type work? Anyway, coming out of INSEAD, I was very clear. I wanted to work in one of two companies. So I only applied to these two companies, LVMH and L'Oreal. And L'Oreal replied back before LVMH did, and I already had the job. And so what did the L'Oreal experience do? 16 years. Well, what am I proud of? At some level, I can say I'm proud that I went that long and stuck it out through thick and thin, because it wasn't an easy ride the whole time. And I had an extraordinary set of experiences. I changed country 5 times during the 16 years that I was at L'Oreal. And so every time that's a new adventure. When you arrive in the country, you have to learn the culture, the business landscape, obviously the teams, and you have a different challenge. And if maybe the marquee moment of my life at L'Oreal was not being promoted to the executive committee and feeling very important and all that comes with. It was the chance to work on the brand Redken. And why that was interesting was that I discovered what it is to be aligned with the brand on which you're working, as opposed to the intellectual exercise of doing the business, getting the paycheck, after you perform the required results. It was this extraordinary community of people that I had the good fortune ending up to lead, if you will. But it was just a group of extraordinary individuals that all shared some common facet. And that experience certainly informed me as an individual, as a leader. It's definitely a strong component of my new book, You Lead. And what I want to do is take out of that are the things that are transferable and that others can benefit from in their business.
Can you shed more light onto this experience? Because you mentioned a very powerful word. I am aligned to the brand and the people around me. And that's why you wanted to transfer that into your next book. So can you shed more light about that?
Right. So to start with, it's interesting to know that I transferred when I went back to America. This is 1998. I was promoted to be in the US team. So I was a marketing person within the team, and therefore very operational, hands-on, dealing with execution to get to delivery of product performance and so on. And that got me a very, I would say, granular experience, and got me to, on a peer level, to understand hairdressers, the distributors, the entire team over there. And therefore to really live the experience of being an employee within the Redken team, which means it goes from being words on a wall to something you live, and you start to learn the behaviors, and of course you have fights and conflicts, and as any good family has, they know how to get through that. So it was a really good textual experience for me, so that when I became head of the company worldwide, I brought that with me. And my challenge then became not only that I felt aligned with it, but my ability to transfer the Redken philosophy into all the countries around the world. We were in 40 countries. And so I was in a constant mode of storytelling and transferring, of course, to adapt them to the local countries. What is Redken and how can it be the force that it is? And the critical alignment that there's a very impactful moment that becomes pivotal in my journey at Redken. But I left the company, I left Redken anyway, in 2003. We have this beautiful mission, which isn't something that just sits on an annual report. But the mission is earn a better living, live a better life. And rather than be some sort of fictional idea, that occasionally comes up, it really was seeded into a lot, not all, but a lot of our activities. And it's that notion of being able to do good while still performing that was really interesting to me, because it's no good just to do good and fail.
Great. Doing good while succeeding. Can you give an example?
Well, certainly. I mean, let's say just from a top line standpoint, when I took over the position, Redken in the world of professional hairdressing was the 5th largest company in the world. An industry that's roughly 3 billion euros in size. And at that time, Redken was the 5th. Today, my sources tell me that Redken is now the number 2 company in the world and hot on the heels of the number 1. So I think that's a pretty good indicator of purpose leading to profits, if you will.
Great. So it seems that there was pivotal moments, as you mentioned, when you lived the experience with the team and you had this behaviors and this interaction with the people, whether it was conflict, whether it was in alignment, and bringing that experience to the higher level when you were the country head, or the worldwide head for the company, and you introduced the storytelling concept and you have tailored that according to the culture of the country that was in. So it seems there was a lot of moments where you enjoyed working and having a culture where everybody was contributing, was having good in mind, was trying to do good in mind. So how that translated into the behaviors or the practices that you used to do? Did you have, let's say, coffee breaks, going out? How did that manifested in the work?
Oh, well, we were, from the outside, we could have called ourselves a cult. We definitely had a set standard, if you will, of behaviors, even of language, and an attitude. I think that's a really key thing, which of course needs to be expressed through behaviors and the type of words you use. So we like to say that we were a family, but we were a family that you don't need to love. You don't need to be part of. You can choose to be part of it, but you don't have to. It's fine if you don't like us, you're not interested in this. That's absolutely fine. In fact, that's probably better. In terms of our, where to start? For example, we had a way to say hello. And there was almost a formal element to it, but it wasn't written down. But it was, to describe it was, we believed in when we said hello, we would do a hug. Now, man to man, woman to woman, woman and man hugs. This is not necessarily the culture everywhere around the world, the cultural ideal of being able to salute yourselves by a hug. So you can just see how that would not necessarily fit in all cultures. But that was something that we subscribed to. So if you're in, then this is what we do. And it wasn't just any old hug, like tap, tap, as the Americans do, tap, 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 tap on the back. It was a 7-second hug. So in a corporate environment, can you imagine all companies accepting to, and all executives doing 7-second hugs? I want to take away the dogma that we didn't exactly count to 7, okay? The idea was to have a longer than usual, not to say longer than comfortable hug. Because in the end of the day, when you do hug, First of all, it's very physical.
Mm.
Second of all, there's a madness to it, which is that almost scientifically, but when you do hug, your heartbeats start to synchronize. When we shook hands, of course, we also shook hands. We were clearly trying to have the V in between your thumb and your index finger. And that V, if you can meet when you do a handshake, in terms of the chakras, I like to say this was the chakra of the heart. So your heart is meeting when you do a proper handshake, which is, I can't show it, but anyway, these were examples. Then at a more macro level, we did a lot of events, and these events had high energy, had certain rituals involved in the beginning, during, and at the end, and all this accompanied by a certain language, and that certain language went down to technical aspects of how you describe the scalp. How do you partition the scalp? So we had language for that. We had, of course, a specific shared component to the products that we were doing, so that the idea that I really wanted to drive was that no matter what part of Redken we were talking about, it was different. And in fact, that no one else would even really want to have this. This whole idea of stealing us, well, they wouldn't really want it. To give another example, Ahmed, is doing the products. So we in 2000, we decided to renovate the biggest portion of the company. So this means marketing stuff, talk about new products, new bottles. The bottle that we had was a disaster as far as industrial constraints were concerned. And we managed to do something that would have been a pain in the butt for anybody else. Harder to do, less efficient. Who on earth would want that? So it became, and is still today, the defining shape of Redken products. So when you're trying to drive a brand, you need to drive the brand through all the elements, including finance. How do you see a Redken P&L? How do you see a Redken educator? How do you see a Redken marketer? And how do you be a Redken leader? Anyway, there you go. A long answer, but that was how we made Redken come alive.
Do you have, for example, public recognition for the contribution of the team and celebrating wins like that?
So we would do a thing every first Friday of the month. And that was to celebrate everybody's birthdays. And also we would do one story. So we would highlight one individual in the company that had done something. And we'd invite them, and they could have been the lowest rank to the highest rank. It could have been someone external partner of ours, because we operate, of course, with lots of partners. And we consider them part of our family, not just the employees.
Great. Did that system that you employed and these experiences that you wanted people to have, like you mentioned, being near to people to celebrate their birthdays, so you want to have a human connection with the employees, you wanted to have this kind of physical connection with people, and this is the first time to know about L'Oréal and Redken, and this was important to know. You mentioned about the finances, and while you were talking, was there any kind of financial reward for the employees regarding of their contribution?
All right, so just want to clear one thing about Ahmed. This was Redken within L'Oréal.
Yes.
And this is important for both points. First of all, the rest of L'Oréal did not operate this way. This was the Redken way.
Redken way, yeah.
And that's an important distinction. So the challenge then becomes, from a governance standpoint, is how to navigate in the corporate world while being different, which is kind of an analogy for life. You want to belong, but you need to feel different. As far as the P&L statement is concerned, I thought I'd elaborate on that, which is that we had the specific element that was different about the Redken P&L was that we would have one line item that was essentially 4 times what the industry standard was.
Mm.
And that was in terms of how you drive the business, where you have the money you can allocate for discretionary expenses, if you will, within the marketing, or at least what we call the business driving investments. And this business driver, which we focused on, was education, which was approximately 12% of our turnover versus a standard, which was just under 3%.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were really over investing compared to the industry standard in education. In terms of rewards, to answer that question, Ahmed, we, of course, were operating within L'Oréal. And you have human resource policies, you have very much a financial oversight that's based on a standard, because you can't very well have a marketing director on one floor who's earning 2 times the amount that someone exact same experience is earning on another floor.
Mm-hmm.
We obviously had to have boundaries for all that so that we didn't create dissension within the ranks. So one thing we did, which was under the radar, and yet extremely effective, because you had to be under the radar, was we decided to craft together a common objective, which was financial. And the idea was, if we can achieve that objective as a team, then we would give the best gift we could give, which was time. So the idea was, and we worked this out into all the logistics, but we allowed, so as soon as the objective was reached, then the time was given. Extra time was given, and we had to work that in our own special chemistry, I would say, because it wasn't something we were talking about openly to the rest, because the rest were all still working 9 to 5, or whatever, their time space at the office. And we were fond of giving away the time, because we've already achieved, we set up these objectives, we've achieved them as a team. Even if you individually didn't perform, you as a team performed, and your participation in the team might have helped somebody else. Of course, you also know that the next month you're going to want to make up for the fact that you didn't participate, and so on and so forth, because you feel like this is a shared reward that we can all get, and everyone benefits from it if everyone participates. Anyway, there you go.
Great answer. I really like that. When you mentioned that you were focusing on the education for the people, and this is for the people, and you were 4 times above the standards of the industry, I think this is very important, because you catered for one of the universal needs for everyone, that people need to grow and need to learn. So you were giving them something very important, very dear to the people, and this helps them to advance even after, maybe not now, but later. And this is very important. I really like this one. It's an intangible thing, but it's very precious, and people can understand it. When you set a common objective, and you give them time. When you set time, you paused, and it was very important, because it's really important, and nobody talks about that much. And people only, even employees, they're asking only for money. But the employees, they are not appreciating the time, and the time is important. So I really like this idea of time and the pause that you did it after time. And I like your style in doing all of that under the radar, which was nice. While the education part is on the radar because it's seen, but you were able to convince the management that this is to the benefit of everyone. So I really like your management style and how you managed to do what you feel right and what's good for the employees and for the team and for the company as well, in the way that is possible and permissible to achieve that. I really like this story. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
Great. As we discussed in the beginning, you had some points in your life where it seems like a turning points. So I think the year 2010, it seems that I think this was the last year in L'Oréal, and then you started your company, The Mindset, and you started the keynote to be a keynote speaker through My Dial as well. So it seems that you moved from this kind of management role within the corporate, and you went into your entrepreneurial vision in life. So can you please tell us your motivation to go into this journey?
So I left L'Oréal in 2009, and from a very visible standpoint, of course, that makes a big difference. I no longer have the swank business cards. I no longer have a corporate car. I don't have flats paid for me. I have to do my own fax machine. Of course, we didn't have faxes, but that was a joke. And visibly, obviously, it was a big change. From a smaller standpoint, I had been speaking a lot at L'Oreal. So switching into a professional speaker wasn't quite a big leap for someone who had been the spokesperson for L'Oreal and had spoken on stages around the world on behalf of L'Oreal or Redken previously. The pivotal elements of my life, I want to articulate them because they somehow collide. For having been in my office in New York, overlooking the trade towers, the World Trade Towers, on the 11th of September, 2001. And so being in New York, Redken is signed Fifth Avenue, New York City. Every one of our marketing campaigns, photographs, had iconic elements of New York in them, including yellow cabs, bridges, interesting buildings, such as the World Trade Towers, because they were lost. We had to redo the initial touch-ups. And also need you to get rid of the image of the trade towers in the background of these two shots. And he paused. Until what floor do you want me to rub them out till? And amongst all the experiences I had that week, because I had a few, I had 4 friends who were killed. I had my father visiting me, who I didn't really see very often. That question was quite powerful because it put into counterpoint the importance of selling shampoos to the lives of people. And that week had many things to it, including a second element, which was that for the last 10 years, up until that moment, I had been interviewing and researching veterans of the Second World War and their experience, which brought me to conversations specifically about how 40% of the prisoners of the Japanese, the Second World War, were killed as prisoners, having been starved, mistreated, or put out as targets for friendly fire. And those 10 years, 130 veterans suggested to me that I live in a very privileged existence. And I wanted to pay tribute to the efforts that they had. So through those 10 years, I started to put together a manuscript about a specific story about my grandfather who was killed as a prisoner of the Japanese in the Second World War. And there I was looking out of my office window in the corner office, as you know, you can imagine, corporate corner office. And I watched the second airplane fly all the way down and hit the southern tower. And I could only think of my grandfather, who on the 8th of December, 1941, I'm captain of a company. I make the image. He's captain of a ship that's called the USS Napa. And in the morning of the 8th of December, 1941 in the Philippines, he was woken up at 3:30 and was told, "Captain, we're at war." And I found the logbook of his ship, the USS Napa. And at 03:40 hours, he used his ink pen and he wrote in, "War has begun with the Japanese Empire." And he signed his name 0340 NM dial. And I thought, oh, wow, that was sort of my equivalent moment for me. And so at that point, you're in another mode. And my mode, rather than going to war, was, I would say, focusing in or leaning in on purpose and how selling shampoos really isn't the most important thing in the world, but helping hairdressers earn a better living and live a better life, that seemed a lot more relevant to me.
And this is the journey that you started in 2010. This was the reason that you were looking for a purpose in your life. And I think after 10 years now, in 2020, you have grown up more after 10 years. And now you ended up with your next book, You Lead. What was the need that you sensed or the need that you knew that this book is going to address?
Well, So this book, actually, I began writing in 2014. And then for a number of reasons, I kept on having to do other things, which are all good. And then last year, Kogan Page approached me about doing this. And I was like, all right, we're going to do it. And what I was interested in doing, or at least they came from a couple of observations. The first is how incredibly disengaged many employees are. Statistics seem to corral around 70% of employees are not engaged in their work. And that doesn't seem, to your initial point about how you can use companies to do good, that doesn't seem like a good thing. If people are dragging their heels to go to work around the world so big. The second observation was that I see a lot of people who are leading companies, but aren't actually happy. They're in positions, they've got cars, they look swank, they're working hard, but they don't necessarily feel fulfilled. And so it also turns out we have this new buzzword of authentic leadership. So, all right, great. How to be an authentic leader? Well, actually, what does that mean? How do you do that and perform? So you need to dig in on who you are. You need to do it in a way that recognizes you have imperfections, vulnerabilities. You might not always like some of the things you don't like about yourself, but you need to embrace them, understand that everybody has imperfections, and yet we can perform. So actually, it's because you embrace your imperfections that you're going to become a better leader. And let's call you become more authentic. But that's going to start by knowing who you are individually. So this book is an attempt to help leaders, give them permission to want to spend time on figuring out who you are. How do you bring that to the office? Just how far along will you accept to have your personal issues and imperfections in a workplace and create a legacy and a long-term sustainable business?
Great. This what you are doing in this book, I really like it. And I want to ask you a question. This book will be like, it's raising the awareness of the people of the importance to know who they are and to embrace their imperfection. What can they do next? Because the book, it will be like an alarming bell. But what can they do next? Did you suggest something in the book?
Well, life's a journey, Ahmed. And I would say that it's an interesting question because I think a lot of us are programmed to, so what?
True.
What are we going to do next?
Yes.
And yet rushing into what we're going to do next is part of the problem. Because first of all, learning who you are, that's not just a simple switch.
Sure.
There's work in there. And by the way, you may not get it all right to begin with.
True.
So that's work in progress. And then, ultimately, as far as what's next concerned, this book is designed to speak to entrepreneurs, mid-level managers, CEOs, and, a person of one leading a house or, an individual leading their own lives. So the answer to what's next totally depends on your context. And, you might decide in your vision of who you are that your legacy isn't about growing 10% every year and being number one and look at my cojones and how big I am. It's possibly something else. And so what's next is figuring out what is your north, what is your North Star, and what's going to drive you, and figuring out what is the next thing I'm going to do that's going to help me get there. As opposed to, and the real work, Ahmed, which I elaborate in the book, is to find a precise north, which is not broad, it's not precise from a magnetic standpoint, but it's one that belongs to you, you're suited to. So it doesn't have to be the exact north, but it's precise to you, Ahmed Arif.
Yes.
And this is mine. And then you craft that. And the important element with this idea is to craft who you want to be, not what you want to do.
The being, not the doing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so being is being present. Being is how you exist, the values you hold. And then, of course, you got to do shit because that's life. And the doing is bringing words to action. But people tend to switch quickly from north to what I got to do, as opposed to figuring out, for example, who you want to be, Ahmed, as a 70-year-old man. What are people saying about your life, who you are as an individual? And until that's clear, I mean, crystal clear, like words coming out of an imagined mouth, then you're going to, I know, I kind of know what I want. And then what happens is you need to, once you've got that idea that's out there, you have this projection of where you want to be, then you need to think of why that's important to you. You need to dig in. You can't sort of say, I got enough. I know I want to be at 323 degrees. That's my direction. Now, why 323? And that takes work. Those are basically going to be through your values. And then once you've identified that you want to be the 7-year-old man who is thinking this, doing this, and being this type of person, what's stopping you from getting there?
Yes. What's the roadblocks here?
Yeah. And then finally, you think about how the fruits you're going to get there. So that's what I say about what's next, Ahmed.
Great. It's a really important topic that you mentioned, and the need that for that you write the book. That's engaged employees, leaders are not fulfilled. This is very, very important thing, and to discover your precise north. This is very important, I think. And as you said, it's a journey. It will take some time. There will be roadblocks, and you have to be vulnerable and embrace your imperfection. This is very important. Thank you for this book, for the idea, for the roadmap you are bringing to the business leaders, how to be better than what they need to do to be better.
Mm-hmm. And you got to, of course, deal that with a company, and it's complex. And I would say this: when you embrace your imperfections, without being too provocative at some level, it's about embracing, for example, your feminine side, knowing that we all have a masculine and a feminine side, and to embrace that, and to understand that really fundamentally, it's about relationships. The relationship you have with you, the relationship you have with your friends and family, the relationships you have with your network, your distributors, your partners, and your employees. And these are ipso facto messy.
Sure.
Just like sailing in a rough sea, it's messy. You're going to get wet. You're going to get cold. You might have nights where you're wondering where on earth you're leaving. The winds are blowing, and you get very quickly blown off course. So you need to have that strong idea of your precise north direction to allow you to traverse all the storms, all the stuff that happens in messy relationships, and stay true to who you are, be fair and firm, and that will help you guide you through and hopefully allow you to feel a better person and have a more fulfilled life. And that can lead to long-term performance for your company.
And be authentic leader. if I am to wrap this great presentation that you mentioned. Thank you, Mentor, for your time. It was a pleasure. Shukran. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all the insights that you brought to me and to the listeners to our podcast. It's really a pleasure to meet you, and I hope our paths will cross again in life.
May it be so, as they say, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you, Mentor. Thank you for your time.